Okay, that's the formal presentation for this evening, and now it opens up for discussion. This is the opportunity now for council to address any or all of these issues that were brought before this evening. Various priorities came about. I think we all learned a few things. I hope you all did too. That it's not a simple issue. It's very complex. And when the city made the decision way back in the 90s to do this golf course project, we realized that, we hoped it would have been very successful, and I think it's on its way, but it's had a lot of shortcomings over the years. But we have an asset, as I think Clay mentioned, we have an asset there, and we can't fix what happened years ago. We got to try to take what we have now and make it work. I think we have a terrific asset in this golf course, because it leads to tremendous visibility for our community, not necessarily for you and I personally, well, me, because I'm a golfer, but for the rest of you are not. But it does have some tremendous value for our city. And some of the developments that we've had that have come out in recent years would have never happened, in my opinion, if we did not have that golf course. And back in 2005, and I think one of you, Mr. Mitchell, somebody mentioned, or Mr. Rubal, yes, I did. I talked about the option to lease or to buy, and I said, but my restriction, and I made it very, very clear in our discussions, was that it would only be for a golf course, not for anything else. And the original deed, and I don't know if you realize that most of this property, except for one parcel, was deeded to the Universal City, thankfully very much, and that what allowed us to come up with this concept of what we can do. So that property was given to us, basically given to us, except for the one parcel that we purchased. And at one time, there was a small portion of it was in Selma, and that's where the 14, well, actually, right where it is now, that's where the Town Place Suites is. That's where that is. That was the only little portion. So there was a little swap between Selma, Universal City, and Church to make sure that everything on the golf course was now under Universal City. So everything related to water, sewer, the services that we need to provide would not have to be shared amongst the cities. So that's just a little background for us. So I'm going to open up for discussion now for our council people, and we'll continue on this. Someone said, is this the end? The answer is absolutely not. This is a step that we're taking. We have plenty of time to come up with we hope will be the positive direction that we need to go. If we finally choose to go to a vote, we don't have to make that decision until August. So we have plenty of time to really work on this. This is an issue that's going to face us, you citizens, us, all of us in the future. So we have to be careful in the decision we make. Everyone must be sure that we've come up with the right solution that's going to benefit everybody into the future. The past is gone. We can't redo the past. We can look at the present, but we got to look at the present for what it's going to be for us in the future. So, okay, I'll get off my soapbox and open it up for everybody. Discussion, anybody? Did you pick up some money?
I was trying to defer to my senior members on council.
Mr. Buck, turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions for the legal counsel and for Ms. Turner, our city manager. How much would it cost us, because you mentioned we could spare ourselves the cost of holding an election in November. How much would it cost, give or take, for Universal City to put this on the ballot in November if we were to move forward in that direction?
We don't know the answer to that. It would be, it would depend on how many other entities were conducting an election in November. You would have it conducted by the Bexar County Elections Administrator, and it would be dependent on who all went out at that same point in time, calling bond elections, however much, and then you would identify the pro rata cost based on the number of machines and polling locations, and then that cost would be allocated to each of the participating members. I mean, to think that it would be less than $100,000 would probably be a good estimate for any of your size. So that's just a rough guess.
I'll try to play like, is it bigger or smaller than a bread box game? I think everybody's familiar with that. For reference, how much is it costing us this year for our city council elections?
I'm not looking at Mr. Vaughn, I'm looking behind Mr. Vaughn. I don't know.
Yeah, so traditionally anywhere between 7,000 and 17,000. It just depends, like you said, who's on the ballot, and our pro rata share. So traditionally, between 7 and 17, that's just for our council member elections typically. The bond election that we did is the higher end.
Okay. Thank you. Back in 2002, the residents of Universal City were faced with a tough decision. Nobody disputes that. The golf course wasn't doing as well as had been hoped, as well as had been expected. The residents were asked to approve an additional half-cent sales tax in the form of the venue tax. According to the Texas Attorney General's opinion number GA0156 from 2004, an election of that type, when a municipality designates a venue project, creates a contract with the residents, as it were. The language from the ballot, the very first thing that was in there was adoption of an additional 0.5% to pay for the reimbursement of the bonds issued in order to fund the golf course approximately 5 years earlier. I personally feel like the residents of Universal City entered into a contract with the city to allocate that half-cent of sales tax and designate it as a venue tax. The number one priority, the stated number one priority of that venue tax was to repay the debt that we incurred to fund the construction of the golf course. The contract, as far as most people I believe are concerned, has now been completed, right? Ms. Turner knows that I'm an analogies type of person. There is additional language in that ballot measure that, yes, technically would allow us to continue with the venue tax and allocate it to other revenue or to other areas of the city, specifically to fund some of those activities that are traditionally covered by the general fund, i.e. salaries, maintenance of the trucks that are used to perform work on the golf course facilities, et cetera, et cetera. But we could also fund those priorities through the general fund. It's my belief that if we continue to pull in the venue tax and spend it on other areas within the city that could/should be funded by the general fund, we're engaging in what a lot of people would call government manipulation of the money and loopholes, and well, technically we're still complying with the ballot language from 2002, and I don't dispute that we would be I'm not saying that we would not be in compliance with the ballot language, but I do believe that the residents were asked to enter into that contract. If we continue to pull the venue tax, I almost feel like it would be, we gave the bank an authorization to pay the money for our car loan out of our checking account. And once that car has now been paid off, the bank continues to pull that money from our bank account and says, well, you need new tires for your car, and you need to replace the shocks, and you could sure use a brake job. I understand that that language is in the ballot, in the measure from 2002, and I don't dispute that that would be legal for us to do, for council to make that decision. However, given that we entered into the so-called contract in 2002 with the residents and stated that the primary function of that venue tax would be to fund the repayment of the golf course debt and those bonds that were issued, I feel that before we do that, we should ask the residents if that's what they wish to continue to do. Now, if we ask the residents, do you wish to reallocate that half cent to another form of tax within Universal City, I would propose either street maintenance or additional funding for the general fund. Both of those items are still going to be coming into the Universal City coffers. We can use that money that comes into the general fund to continue funding those much needed repairs, renovations, and additions at the golf course. But I also believe that the golf course should be placed on the same level as some of our other facilities within Universal City that are potentially discretionary spending. When I say discretionary spending, police, fire, safety, infrastructure, those items are non-negotiable. That's not discretionary spending. We have to pay for our police, our fire, for our sewer, water upgrades, et cetera, et cetera. But if I look at the splash pad, the library, the animal shelter, those are all things that are used by a small portion of our community. One could legitimately make an argument that the golf course is only funding a certain segment of our population. I don't believe that that is an inaccurate statement. But I could also argue that the library only serves a small portion of our community. Do I advocate for the elimination of the golf course? Certainly not. I'm sorry, do I advocate for the elimination of the library or the animal shelter? Certainly not. But I feel like the golf course, now that those bonds have been paid off and the original purpose of the of the venue tax has been accomplished, that we now consider placing the golf course on an even playing field, see what I did there, with the other facilities in Universal City, so that we can consider their funding needs along with all of the other funding needs for the other activities, facilities in Universal City that require funding. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My throat's dry. I'm going to drink something.
Point of clarification.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sure you're going to respond. I just want to make sure it's clear. I think there was two questions in there. One is, if you move all of the venue tax over to just a regular tax and use it in the general fund, then could it be used to make repairs on the golf course? I believe that was your first question.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, I lost track of what your second question was.
I think they were rhetorical questions, actually.
I think your first question was, and I'm sorry, I wrote it down, was the number one issue on the ballot for the construction on the debt service.
To repay the bonds, yes, ma'am.
Of the bond. And I don't know if that's a question for you.
No, I do, and you very well spoken. I mean, I don't disagree with anything that you said. It's a policy issue. I do think that the one caveat that I would say is on the interfund transfer, the borrowing is a borrowing that I think is in addition to the bonds themselves, and it was debt that was incurred by the city, self-funded debt, but debt nonetheless. And if you were to ask me what would be my strong advice would be to pay that back before you did the extinguishment of the revenue.
Yes, sir. Notice that I specifically left that portion out of my soliloquy. I will leave that to my more qualified colleague to discuss the numbers and whether or not those transfers. I'll speak to policies and stuff like that. I'll let Mr. Vaughn, I suspect, will have a few words about that.
Can you legally use sales tax, not venue tax, sales tax to support a venue tax? And can you legally
To support a venue project.
a venue project? Thank you. And can you use ad valorem tax to support a venue project?
Right, and so if you eliminate this as a revenue stream, you have a voted venue project nonetheless. In 2002, that was the qualification when it was voted by the electorate. There is a prohibition under 334 of the local government code, which is the venue statute, that says that you cannot use ad valorem tax to support a venue project unless it is specifically voted or it is part of a park system. Park system to me is that it is designated as a park. So you haven't done that, so I would say that an ad valorem tax transfer from your general fund is prohibited for the golf course because, go ahead.
I was going to say, can we clarify for everybody that ad valorem includes sales tax and not just property taxes?
So ad valorem is only property tax. So sales tax, if we voted sales tax for street maintenance and we reallocated this 0.5% for street maintenance, it would not also be an eligible use of that sales tax under that proposition.
Yes.
Okay. If you voted it for ad valorem property tax reduction, then I believe it would be eligible to be used under that context. Now, there are some limitations when you revote sales tax for general fund support. For example, street maintenance sales tax cannot be used to support debt service, whether that be self-supporting debt or actually debt secured by sales tax. I believe the same is true for a general sales tax transfer. I would have to check on that to confirm, depending on what source of law you want to pursue. But you should not assume that you could use any of the sales tax transfers to support debt that's issued and secured by another source such as your ad valorem tax collection.
Yes, sir. Could we use, if the council were to reallocate that portion of the venue tax as an example, half of that, which would be 1/4 cent to the general fund and 1/4% to the street maintenance, could we use that 1/4% that goes into the general fund, that is for all operations in Universal City, including those operations at the golf course? Is that correct?
I believe we would have I caveat all of these answers from the dais or from the podium as saying I would want to confirm that legally. But I believe the answer to that is yes. But you would then have to track those revenues separately to make sure that you are not using something that is legally prohibited from that particular purpose.
Yes, sir, and we certainly don't want that.
Right.
Very well. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Next, anyone? Bill, you're on.
So, Mr. Benford, I have a couple questions for you. You mentioned just what you just said that we're not designated as a park, the golf course, right? So that there was some limitations on that. So is that simple for us to just designate it as a park?
It's not. If you designate it as a park, then if you ever want to transfer it, it has to be voted by the public before you can actually divest yourself of it. It becomes legally protected under law. To where you have very limited opportunities with what you want to do. Now, you can designate it as a park, but you're now coming in doing that after the formulation of that contract with the voters. So you can't impose upon the voters a contract that they didn't have the benefit of at inception. And even if you did that, you would have to be worried about the law of unintended consequences, that if you wanted to try to go and sell it at some point down the road, even though it can only be used for golf course pursuant to the deed restrictions, you would first have to have a public vote before you could do that. So it's not as simple as doing that. If you designated it, you would then have the ability, perhaps under a new election, for some flexibilities, but it would also come with some handcuffs.
Thank you. And then on the street sales tax, if we had a street sales tax, and this is off the cuff, so you weren't prepared for this, so feel free to say no or you don't know the answer, but can that be used to pay debt service on a street maintenance bond?
It not specifically says that a street maintenance tax has to be revoted once every 4 years.
Well, it can't be as security for the bonds, but can it be used to pay debt service?
It's the other way. So then that is used as not only a prohibition on the transfer, but it doesn't actually say it can't be used to secure debt. It says it can't be used to pay debt. So there's an interpretation by the Attorney General's office that says that extends to we cannot pay and we cannot pledge. It's the more comprehensive of the two.
Okay. On priority one, you were talking about the interfund loan, the $2.4 million. Well, on the 2021 audit, which is the most recent financial statements we have, were you aware that the golf course also has $1.5 million in the bank and a receivable from other funds of $1.9 million? So it's a total of $3.4. Would that change your opinion if the golf course had enough money to pay off that interfund as of 9/30/21? Would that change?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that was mentioned previously was, or not tonight, but to me previously, was in 2002 when we passed the venue tax, that like the linear park had to be in existence at that time. Is that true or is that not true?
We would have to go back and study a little bit more. It could be a linear park system that could be added to over time. We would go back. It depends on if you actually had a park plan or if you had identified linear parks at that particular point in time. If you had no other linear parks and you had no designs on actually creating a linear park system, I would probably tell you that word is not effective for purposes of utilization of the revenue. If you had a linear park system and if you had a plan for adding to it, I suppose you could possibly do that, but I'd have to think about that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, one question. So there's a distinction between open spaces and linear parks?
Yes, there is.
Can you explain that definition real quick?
Sure. Parks has a particular connotation under state law, and that is the one that I just described. Open space is space that's generally available to the public, but does not rise to the level of designation as a park. So an open space would be a common area practice field or an amateur soccer field for children to play soccer or something of that nature. Would you designate a golf course as an open space? Could you still charge fees for access to use an open space? I think you start running into some trouble if you try to call it open space for purposes of one issue, again, unintended consequences, you can still charge park fees, or admission fees. I would say you probably have trouble doing that.
I have one more question for Mr. Binford, and then I'll just close my comments. If you also, so one of your strategies also was to keep the venue tax, but then charge like an overhead to the golf course fund. If I would assume that needs to pass a reasonableness test as well. Like if the golf course budget's $2 million, you can't charge it $4 million in overhead. Is that right?
Right. And I just want to clarify that, because I think that's something that should have been done at inception. I don't think that's something that, and I appreciate what you're saying, technically we should not do this. I would say technically you should have been doing it since 2002. And the fact that it hasn't been done before means that the general fund, the $1.9 million liability should probably be something significantly greater because of the services that have inured to the benefit of the golf course. So when I hear $17 million of sales tax transfer, I think that's missing a piece of this, and that's services. Services that have been provided for this asset. Services that the asset should have been paying out of the revenue streams available to it from whatever source. So I think we would look at I think that if you were to pursue this, you would take a survey of staff and you would say, how much of your time is allocated to management of this asset? And if it's 50%, then I would look at it and make sure that people documented their time so that you had a trail as to how you would support that in audit. And then you would allocate the cost, not a markup or something looking to try and extract a larger amount of money into the general fund that's disproportionate to the actual cost of the city. It's not a profit center. It is to supplement the actual expenditure of resources that are applied to that asset. And that should be documented, and it should be transferred, and it should be matched to the particular service for which it's delivered.
Right. So 1.6 million as an indirect charge to the golf course, if their budget's 2.1, probably wouldn't be reasonable. Would that be a fair statement? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I'll put you off the hot seat. I just want to say that thank you to the residents. You guys knocked it out of the park tonight. I'm very impressed with everybody who got up there and spoke. It was awesome. To me, this is really not about the golf course. The staff's done a great job getting it to where it covers its costs, and none of us want to get rid of the golf course. This is really a question about our structure of revenue. Do we want a dedicated tax revenue to go to the golf course, which is a want, not a need? If we're going to have a dedicated tax revenue, I think it should go to one of our needs, which is infrastructure, public safety, something like that. We've asked all of our residents to go into debt for streets so that the golf course can keep its sales tax. And I don't think that's appropriate. I think that it's time that we move this back to a street maintenance sales tax. It doesn't mean we need to get rid of the golf course. We can talk about how we're going to pay for the golf course, but the golf course is actually in good shape. I mean, it's covering its costs, and it's meeting its obligations. Yes, there's capital needs that the city has identified that I think we can fund through some of the surpluses from the golf course. But even if we can't, if there's a big number that needs to go to the golf course, which is a want, that should definitely go to the citizens. And if we're afraid to go to the citizens and ask them, what do you want to do with this money, then we're probably doing something wrong. And I think the only reason not to convert this into a street maintenance sales tax is because we're worried that we pull this away and now the golf course won't have the funding that it needs to keep operating. And if we're worried about that, we're worried about it because the citizens are going to tell us no if we ask for a bond. And future councils are going to say no on giving the golf course more money. Well, if that's the case, then that's the will of the people, and we should abide by that. So I don't think we should be afraid of that. Right now, with the venue tax, the golf course is not accountable to any of the voters. It's a dedicated tax revenue, so it can do what it wants, when it wants. The voters can't say anything. We can't even really say anything because all that money goes straight to the golf course. It's time to return that to the general fund and make it an annual budget process where we fund our needs first, and then if we have extra money, we can give it to the golf course. And we want to keep the golf course running. We want to make it profitable, and there should be plans for that, business plans later to make that happen. But right now, it's just a discussion on the venue tax, which I think it's time. So, thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
All right.
Mr. Mayor?
Anybody, Mr. Neville?
Yeah. You know, when I was younger, I had great eyesight. I could read a street sign that was 50 yards away. I can't do that now. I wish we had that foresight way back then. because we thought, and the citizens thought, that we were going to have a great venue. We never expected that it would happen. We never expected that big flood. We never expected wild boars to come in, feral hogs come in, wipe out 2 holes, until we had to have our police chief have permission from a helicopter to shoot them. That's the only way we got rid of them. Now, what we need to do now is to use what we have and not look at foresight now, and we can't go back with hindsight, because that never solves anything. What we have to do is what we have, take here and now, make decisions that affect us in a very, very positive way. Whatever that takes, I'm ready to do it. And I think all of us are.
Definitely. Ms. Goolsby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, piggybacking on what Phil said, there was a lot of great comments earlier from everybody, and one of them that sticks out in my mind is that this is a discussion tonight. We're not making these decisions tonight. This is an ongoing discussion. What was brought to us tonight was eye-opening, and then what was brought after the presentation, wow, that's even more stuff to consider. So everybody keeps asking me, Barry, what was your plan? What's your plan for the venue tax? My original plan was hoping that we could continue the venue tax for a couple of years to provide the upgrades that the golf course needs, because years ago, when we first got on this council, it was in the red. We see it every year getting better. It's in the black. Wow. The plans that we set as an architect, I walked through the golf course with not my client, but a client, and look at it through their eyes and see what they need. There's some upgrades. There's some facilities that could be added. We've had people come in here to council and be frustrated that they didn't feel like they belonged at the golf course. Well, first off, that's their issue. Second, because everybody belongs at the golf course. Second, there are some things that we could do. There are some ideas that we threw out there to play at the golf course that makes it to where it feels more like a family environment for everybody. But whether that happens or not, that's a discussion that we will continue to have, or somebody else will continue to have. But hearing what we can do with the venue tax to move forward, I really want more of that legal side of it, because if you can turn it and move it to help with the parks, that's the part I'm not totally grasping at the moment, is how much of that can go into funding, the parks side of this, funding the public works side of this with streets and things that access this. Councilmember Buck discusses that this is a contract entered into with the citizens back then whenever it was approved, and was really focusing on the language there. I'm still seeing it as that park aspect. But again, as Phil states, that this is something that we can put in the general fund, and we can start to look at our needs versus our wants. And I appreciate that as well. So my original plan is definitely getting the whole shot into it, but I mean, I don't want to rush into these decisions. I hope everybody has seen that this is a very complex issue. So let's keep talking about it. I hope we have more of these discussions going forward. I know there's people that want us to make a decision tonight. We're not going to do it. This needs to be thought through, because there are ramifications to not thinking it through and working through it. So I do want to understand more about the 1 point whatever million that the golf course owes the city, and make sure that we don't hit ourselves with a financial speed bump in the future for that.
So thank you. For the benefit of you hearing that feedback, what I would do is work with staff and see we have a $950,000 park budget number What does that entail? What is the anticipated use of those funds? What did the park system look like in 2002? And were there any statements around supporting parks as they existed or as they might exist in the future at that point in time? And if we can do a little bit more background looking on those issues, then we'll be able to provide you a better answer so you can make a better decision.
And I'll ask this question even though I know the answer. Randy, did we have a parks master plan in 2002?
Yes, we did.
Yes, okay, so that's where we'll start.
Okay. Because it's just, it's not a cut and dry. It's not, as Councilmember Shelby said, it's not a light switch. I don't want to just turn it off. I want us to make sure that we have everything worked through because, again, legal counsel's here tonight. Councilmember Vaughn is able to, go back and forth with certain aspects that raise more questions. So every time there's more questions, but I do believe that this eventually needs to go back to the citizens. Is it this November? Possibly. More than likely. I don't know. I want to know more about our 1 point whatever debt that we need to pay back before we make that decision, before I make that decision on my side. That's all I have, Mr.
Well,
Mayor.
I think that's a key issue that you're bringing up here is that interfund loan. I think it's imperative that we consider that as a must. Do we really need to do that? And how that's done, I think that can be worked out because that's clearly could have a negative consequence on the city in the long term if that interfund loan is not paid back, which I think we all come to the conclusion that we agree with that. So that's an issue certainly that we're faced with as well. Definitely. So, Mr. Shelby, can you Mr. Najarian?
2002, what was the sales tax rate?
In 2002, well,
Combined with the county?
percent.
So that's why I'm asking with the language. We didn't add sales tax. We reallocated existing sales tax. That's why I'm trying to get the correct answer on that one. Was it 825 or was it 775?
So initially, when the city started out with its sales tax, the city had 1% going to the general fund. He's asking me to see. Thank you, Mr. Buck. Initially, the city had a 1%, right? The state had a 6.25%, and then the cities have the option to go up to a cap of 2%. So you took 1/2 of your other 1%, and that went to the venue tax, and then the voters approved the 1/2 of 1% for economic development, and that's your combined 2%. That's your cap. That's the cap all cities have.
So that's what I'm trying to find out. In 2002, was the tax rate 725, 775, or 825?
Well, it would have been hanging on to that one was in 97, and the other one, I don't know which one happened first at this point. Whether it was golf or EDC, but we were at 1%.
But regardless, prior to the venue tax being added to sales tax, that half cent didn't exist.
Correct.
So anybody spending money, not living, spending money in the city of Universal City had an increase of an extra half cent for every dollar they spent inside the city.
1/2 of 1%.
Right, so half a penny. Okay, so if I paid $1 for something, it cost me half a penny of sales tax. Okay, so we added that in 2002.
Right.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure. I understood. Do we charge sales tax at the golf course?
Yes. Yeah.
So the golf course generates sales tax revenue as well?
And on golf as well.
I'm sorry?
On both food and beverage and golf service.
And events?
And golf merchandise.
And events?
Yes.
So the full cost of the event gets sales tax, not just the...
Unless the tax is like if it's a tax-free organization.
Right, so I know sometimes services are not taxable.
Yes.
So, okay, so if somebody spends $10,000 at the golf course for an event, they're going to pay 2% of that. Right, 2% of that's going to go back to the city as sales tax. 1 cent goes to the city general fund, half a cent of that goes to the EDC, and half a cent that goes back into the venue tax.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
How many of our parks generate revenue? How many of our parks generate revenue?
Parks don't generate revenue,
Thank-
they're a public service.
Okay. And I know the answer to the question. I just wanted to ask it out loud. Thank you. So our parks don't generate revenue, and not everybody in the city uses our parks, and yet we use property tax to build, maintain, repair, expand, add bathrooms, water fountains, build a splash pad, right? That all comes out of our property tax. Or we get a bond for it and it comes out of
General
our,
fund revenue, which is ad valorem.
and a little bit of mixture of,
Sales tax.
okay,
All your user fees,
okay. And the golf course generates revenue.
yes.
Okay. So while it didn't generate enough revenue to pay its debt, and while there were a large amount of golf courses in the county, it was having a difficult time generating enough revenue to pay its debt, having enough golfers come in and play the course. And over time, and at the time, I believe when it was built, we weren't doing weddings or any kind of events.
No, sir, when the golf course was built, it was never intended to do a weddings and events. It was, it had a conference room, but it was to be used for tournaments. It had the bar and grill, which was for after, but there was no intention of using it for any other type of event. It wasn't until Katie was brought in 10 years ago. She just had her anniversary 10 years ago that we actually started building up the wedding and events portion of the facility.
Okay, so these are also things that we didn't see as a possibility of happening when the golf course was built, as an opportunity to increase the revenue stream for the golf course. Let's see, where else was I going with this?
We also did anticipate having community events at the golf course. We didn't have happy hours either.
Which also generates sales tax.
We had the Easter egg hunt there. We have the Toga Run. Virginia, whatever events we had there, father-daughter dance, mother-son dances. We've had movies in the park, midnight movies, the flashlight walks, whatever else. Regina has a crazy little tattoo. Those were not planned for the golf course as well. We incorporated them at the time.
Okay, so if we have done a great job of building up our customer base, golf courses in the city have a lot of them. There have been several amount of them that have closed, some up the road, some others, which has reduced the amount of places to play golf in the city, which has increased demand on our golf course, which we are seeing, which is great. So the golf course has the opportunity to make more money than it has in the past. If we don't have a good way of maintaining and or improving the existing golf course, it will just continue to age and fall apart, just like any other park in the city that, as we didn't have money to pay for a park to be repaired, it aged, swing sets start rusting. Nobody, like, there's a set of, I'm not even sure if they're still there at UC Park, that were probably the original swing sets at the entrance that, are they gone finally? Okay. Awesome. But that's the point. I mean, in this discussion and these decisions, you know, I talked about, thank you for reminding me of the light switch analogy. This is a multi-million-dollar business. And you can't make decisions about what we're going to do with funding that is there to support it on emotion and quick math and what's going to happen in the next 6 months. We do need to be thinking about what we're going to do with the golf course over the next 10 or 20 years. Because if we're going to make quick, snap decisions, we might as well just close the doors and lock them. I mean, if we're gonna make quick decisions, we might as well just shut it down and walk away. Nobody wants to do that. So let's slow down, calm down, and I really mean it. You guys have gotta calm down. I don't post on your social media, but oh my Lord, I read it. Calm down. Okay? This is something that has to be thought out. And as if everybody has said, I've had 5 different people get up and give 5 different numbers, 5 different amounts of, huge amounts of money that have been spent on the golf course. 12 million, 19 million, 24 million. I mean, what are we playing? The Price is Right? I want to make decisions on real numbers. I want to make decisions without emotion. And I want to make decisions that look at the long-term success of the golf course. Because otherwise, we might as well just shut it down. It owes the general fund money. It needs to pay the general fund back. If the city staff is spending that much time supporting it, and I know the city staff is spending time supporting it, and we're able to document that, account for it, and then collect it, we are effectively getting our staff paid back, and the money is coming into the city, and it can be used for general fund revenues. If there's things we want to get in parks, and we want to get parks done, and there's extra money, let's get it done. Otherwise, I mean, getting into light switch, let's just get rid of the half-cent sales tax altogether. Don't put it back in the general fund. It was never there to begin with. We created it for the venue tax. Like, we can play devil's advocate all night long. There is a lot to be talked about here, but without thinking this through, looking at the numbers, losing the emotion, and making an appropriate decision for the long term, we're going to make a bad choice. And in 10 years, we're going to be back where we were in 2002 going, oh crap. Everything's falling apart, and now we have to either start pulling money out of the general fund to pay for it, which nobody wants to do. I mean, that's the big thing. Nobody wants their property taxes going towards it. And then it comes in the same situation, and I'm not going to have you re-explain it, but can it even happen? Can we start pulling money out of the general, money out of the general fund to pay for it if the law says it? We can't. Now we have to go back and reintroduce another venue tax to support it again, or shut the doors and lock them. I think that's enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me take a few things that Mr. Williams brought up too. When I got on this council, you know, we have our regular, excuse me, we have our regular 5-year plan that we go through, that we come up with what we're going to do in each 5 years. And our city manager at the time was Ken Taylor. When I first came on, he got us together and was talking about not only 5, we need to start thinking 10, 20, 30 years into the future. You know, when a lot of us aren't around anymore, but what's best for the city of Universal City in the long run, for a lifetime, for other people's lifetime, for a kid's lifetime. And I took that to heart. So when things came up like the restructuring, what we're going to do with the aviation district, our long-term plan there to bring that up and to bring people out and to modernize that, we got on board. And I've looked at saying, you know, and talked to people saying, down the future, there's going to be that area there. I've heard a lot of people say that the golf course itself, and I can see the logic in that, you know, people said, we bring people to the golf course and they'll go through the city and spend their tax dollars. But where it's located, sometimes those people don't make it into the city. And I could see that too, saying, so yeah, but once like the aviation district comes up and you've got a viable property like the golf course going, people will be going to the golf course and saying, hey, you know that new venue down there in the aviation district? we got to go there after we finish our round of golf. And it does bring them to the city, and it will generate more money. These type of discussions are fantastic. I've learned a lot from, the financial language. Believe it or not, I've learned a lot from you too. Some of those numbers are over my head, but at the same time, we want to do what's right for the city. And I always say that if we are short-sighted in our thinking, it will only harm us in the long run. As Mr. Vinford had put it, the golf course is an asset and that should be continue to be funded. Now, I'm at the point now where y'all want to get rid of the venue tax and we do something else with it. You know what? I'm all for changes. There's lots of things, again, we talked about that things are changing. There's new ways we can do things with the money. If it takes putting things back into the general fund, I don't care how it's funded. This is going to be my point, though. We don't want to think short-sighted. We do have time on this issue. My big issue is the golf course. You have the golf course, you have food and beverage, and you have conference. Before, we have places where my father and stepmother, Northcliffe, that went down. Northcliffe is a golf course. A lot of these golf courses that are going out of business are golf courses that would just get their funding from rounds of golf. And that didn't cover it. They went under. I don't know how many people are familiar with the Northcliffe area. I am, since, like I said, my parents live out there. It got discussed. Property values have gone down. People are in an uproar. What used to be the golf course is shoddy at best. I see for sale signs all over that. To me, that's short-sighted. They might have been able to. I don't know. I don't want to say it for that community itself, but was it Woodcliff out in Woodlake? Thank you very much. I don't know how many people are familiar with that. Used to be a beautiful golf course. Now it's a place that people walk out there too. Also, houses get robbed out there too from people coming in the back. Property values also out there have gone down. There's for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, as they say. Now, for the future of Universal City, I say the asset in our golf course, when people say, and I understand, hey, put them on a level footing. If the golf course can't make money itself, and it dies out. It dies out. If that's what happens, that's the way it is. That's the way America is. Let's think of it, if that dies out, and we say, okay, it could make money, that golf course, most of that golf course, if I'm right, is in a flood zone. We really couldn't do anything with it as far as building on it, am I correct? If we turn it into a park, we'd still have to maintain it. It wouldn't generate any money. It'd just be taking money, am I correct? So the golf course itself might not pay for itself. This is where our asset comes in. We don't have just a golf course. And I urge you not to think of it as just a golf course. We have a golf course. We have food and beverage. And thank you very much for your farsightedness. We have started getting into the black because of that. And the weddings we have out there, we have golfing events. And if I'm right, again, things that keep that golf course making money might not be the rounds itself, since the rounds are finite. You can add it up. There's only so many rounds you can do in a day. You're going to have weather, but there's a number, and I'm not sure exactly what that number is. Somebody said it before, but it can only make a specific amount of money. But the food and beverage has been very important. The weddings have been very important. People say, well, we can still have weddings. If there's not a golf course, there's not going to be any reason to have a wedding out there. The problem we're seeing now is that we're getting very popular. We just found out we are the third best golf course in San Antonio. That's nothing to, we're proud of that. That's something to be proud of. We're coming up. We've been put in magazines of having a fantastic wedding venue. We have golfing events. The problem we're having is because of the facility, the age of the facility, the size of the facility, things that need to be upgraded, we can't have a couple events together. Am I correct? There's just not enough room. You got a wedding on one day, you can't have a golfing event. And I say, why not? We want to make money with this golf course, and I am not opposed at all down the line of taking away all the funding and letting it on its own because of that fact. If we have all, that's a three-pillar thing. We have the golf course, we have food and beverage, we have the facilities to do the weddings and golfing events. We have a brand new hotel out on our only 35 because we have a golf course. Let's go up to them later. You know, if we neglect it, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's why I say, which was not popular at the time, and probably isn't that popular now, is instead of thinking of ways we can take funding away from the golf course, we need to add funding in there to upgrade, and I'm saying even possibly put another structure or add to the structure we have to where we can have more than one event at a time and keep profitable. Now I'm going to go into the other side because that's the third pillar. Golf is on itself, I think, and it's like horse racing. I figured in the long run, no, that is not going to be enough to make that sufficient. Then again, if the golf course dies, what's going to happen to down the line? Property values, things start going down. You start complaining about, the taxes on your homes now. It's like that gets run down. Property values will start going down too. And it's like, don't worry about the property taxes because that's not, and that is a trickle down effect that will make it to the rest of Universal City. I'm just trying to think towards the future. If we have a fantastic venue on this side, we have a fantastic venue working on aviation. It makes Universal City a destination area. So it's short-sighted. I'm all for changing the way we fund. Give me some, let's go through these workshops and we take our time to find out the right way to fund it, but let's not let go of that asset. We make that asset better than anything around. We make it a destination spot. And that helps everybody in Universal City for now and in the future. We've got costs coming up that even if we're just getting into the black now, if we let it off by itself. Correct me, please, Mr. Turner. Or anybody knows this, grass on a golf course, we were going through this before last, 25 years, and we're at 22?
20 years, typically we're at 23.
Okay, typically we're at 23. Any money, even if we get into the profit, we're making profit, and we take away, I don't think the amount of profit that the golf course in the short run will be enough to fund a venture of changing all that grass out. I don't know what the cost would be there, but it's got to be pretty enormous. I would think it's expensive. Upgrading the kitchen facilities, that would be so greatly needed there. The building itself, there's lots of things that need to be doing. But there isn't any room on that property for expansion. There isn't any room to expand that parking lot, to do things that will make it profitable in the future. I am like you. the golf course should be able to fund itself. But it will fund itself when we have those three pillars together: food and beverage, golf course, conference or event center, whatever you want to call it. We upgrade those that are making the money for the golf course. And that will be a valuable property in the future that we can all be proud of. But cutting off all the funding now would be short-sighted, and I would believe be very detrimental to the community in the long run. But again, through all this, again, I'm not against getting rid of the venue, calling it whatever you want. I am against cutting off funding, badly needed funding, to expand and do what we need to do with the golf course and event center in the future to make it a viable property. And through this, we have time to be able to figure that I have no clue what I'm talking about, or that we can take the time to make sure that we do it right. Whether we take it to the people, whether we use the powers that are given to the council to be able to make those decisions. And if it goes out to people, I just want the people to know it's not just a golf course closing or just barely making it on its own. It's what it's going to do with the rest of the community in the long run, 10, 20, 30 years down the line. That's all I have. Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Well, long term is obviously what's very important.
Yes.
There's many needs, golf course being one of those needs. Streets being another need. There are all kinds of needs that we have. And that's what we're up here to try, is to make that decision on your behalf, to make sure that we do provide the best services we can for our community. Whether something comes out to you for a vote in this November or next May, whenever it is, that's something that this council is going to deliberate and make those recommendations, and we'll press on from there. So we still have time for discussion. Mr. Goolsby.
Thanks, sir. So what does the process, the question was asked, what does the process look like? So, I mean, do we have more of these types of meetings on a Tuesday night to have this discussion, to gain more information, legally as to what the requirements that we should fulfill are? Is there money in the account to fulfill those without the venue tax? Those types of questions, to get more answers on the park definition. How do we, a minute ago I said, 10 minutes ago Paul was wordy. I said, I want to make sure we have all the information. I think everybody has said that. We want to know all of the information before we just, before we make a decision. What does that process look like? How, going forward?
Well, we're continuing on with this process, and I can hopefully answer that question, is that it's an ongoing one. And to say this, let's set this as the deadline, I don't think that's fair. I think we need to continue to look at it. We got some priorities presented to us tonight, and I think that we can take a look at those. And as far as what the next step is to continue the dialogue. I don't want us to get into setting a timeline as to where we want to be in the next month or the next month and a half, whatever. I think it's important for us to look at every issue, and the long term is clearly it, and let's not make any hasty decisions. And I think every one of us does not want to do that. Absolutely, is we want to make sure we do what's right for not now, but for not just now, but now into the future as well. And I think we all totally agree with that. And so that's why we asked for this particular session tonight, and had some legal counsel here too to present some of those issues, because some of them are certainly have legal ramifications. And so we've got to make sure whatever decision we make is the correct one legally as well. And so we're not putting ourselves behind the power curve by making a decision that may not even be legally palatable. Okay, so we're still on. So, Bear, I appreciate that. That's exactly our next step, is to continue the process, and whether that means another meeting in 2 weeks, whatever, continuing the discussion as a discussion item in the next council meeting. That's certainly a thing I would recommend that we do. That we don't put any cutoff dates on there. We continue to pursue and you guys tonight great. Really appreciate you coming. It's terrific feedback that we get. It's really helpful. Kim, you want to do that? I'll turn it over to William again.
Yeah, I'm going to tag on to Mr. Goolsby because, that's the question in your staff's mind too. Given kind of what you've heard tonight, what you thought before, what we've discussed before, if you could give us some direction of what you want the next step to be, we'll start to prepare for that, but we're not going to do anything unless you give us some kind of direction, because remember, we're here to carry out the will of the council, and so if you could help us out with that, we want to have more discussion and set up a meeting, we'll look for a date. If you want to look at some of the priorities that have been brought up by your bond council tonight, you need to let us know so that we can start working on that.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Well, that leads me into the question I was going to ask you anyway. There were several items that were brought up where, and I apologize, I forgot your name. Mr. Benford mentioned that he would have to go back and take a look at. And I don't know if we clearly defined, yes, we do want you to go look back at that. And I wasn't taking notes. I hope somebody else was. But I think we should review that, the open space question. Everything that was brought up where you mentioned, hey, I need to go and look into that. I think that should be the next conversation. Everything we mentioned, the money that's owed back to the city, the money that's sitting in the golf course apparently has a surplus. I want to identify that. Is that the case? Is that surplus there for a reason? Are we doing the same thing with the golf course that we should be doing as individuals and as the city, and having a rainy day fund, so that the golf course doesn't have a problem? We go, oh crap, we got to get money out of it somewhere. Where do we get it from to deal with this? Or we'll go borrow it again and put the golf course back in debt to deal with it. You pay off your house, and then you start saving up for all the stuff that you've been putting off while you've been making those payments for the last 25, 15, 25, 30 years. Now it's time to start fixing it. But before you start fixing it, I want to make sure I got enough money in case something really bad happens. And I would imagine we would want to do the same thing with a golf course, is making sure it's in the black, its debts are paid, it's stuff that has been being put off for the last however many years while we've been paying the debt is identified clearly. Because this is the first time I heard about the debt. I knew there was some debt, I just didn't know what the number was back to the general fund. Are we 100% sure that is the exact number? Is there not more money that's owed back to the general fund that we just haven't identified yet? I think this should all be on the list for the next conversation, so that we really, really understand where the golf course and conference center are lies is financially. Because we can't make a decision. I've said it, I'm going to repeat myself again. We cannot make a decision without all the information. At least not a good one. Thank you.
Agreed. Mr. Najarian.
Just real quickly, as far as direction, I would be saying first, take a little time digesting this. Mr. Binford answering a couple of those questions, so we do have all the information, like you said. And I, for one, would like to continue a discussion or try to get some action going sooner than later on getting that 1.9 paid back to the general fund before we come up with the idea of where we're going to go with everything else. I think that should be, you were talking about that would be a great idea, which I agree. Make sure that's all off the table before we go on to whatever we're going to do in the next stage. But I would think the discussion on that 1.9 and that would be something we should be working on sooner than later.
Well, we've got some priorities that were presented to us tonight, 1 through 4, and I would ask council to take a look at those priorities and see where if you are in agreement with some of them, can we mix and match them? And I totally agree that first priority should be one of our top issues to pay back what we need to, because I think that's important for us for our fiscal well-being in the future, is to do that. And then what to do with the venue tax is important. I think we all agree we don't want to lose the golf course. The question is if we've got an asset there, we want to make sure that asset produces the way we want it to produce. And there are things that are whether we want or need. I think we need them, but that's an item for debate. But I would suggest that we take a look at these priorities that were presented to us tonight. We will discuss them at our next council meeting as an agenda discussion item again. So it's just to get some more feedback amongst the six of us, because I hope you guys realize that the only time that we can discuss things together is in this venue. We do not discuss these in public. We cannot do that by law. And so the first time that we see a lot of items is the first time you see a lot of items. And I think you need to be aware of that. So this venue to have discussion continuing on is very healthy for us, and will help us make a informed, intelligent decision on where to go with the funding in the future. And remember, we've got a workshop coming up, starting our budget workshop very soon as well. So there are lots of venues that are available to us to work within to make sure that we do this right. I totally agree with you. All of you, we totally agree that we don't want to jump in this as a hasty decision. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Points all well taken about not wanting to make hasty decisions. Absolutely agree with everybody. We want to be fully informed. Got to make sure we have all the information to understand the impact of what our decisions will have on our great city. However, I also like to be prepared for multiple options, multiple courses of action. With that in mind, Mr. Mayor, one of the things that I've proposed, and it's been discussed several times tonight, is putting a measure on the November ballot that would reallocate the venue tax into something else, whether it's streets, general, a combination of all of those, reduction of property taxes, etc. I propose that part of the direction that we give to staff is to start drafting a proposed language for that November ballot with a few blanks in there that would be to reallocate the venue tax into something to start looking at the possibility of having that language on the ballot rather than having to struggle at the last minute if that's the way that the council decides to move forward with it.
Okay, well, there's no decisions tonight.
No, sir. But
we would like to have staff take a look at a potential language that would go into a ballot that could be as early as November.
Yes,
it
sir.
could be at another time.
Yes, sir.
Depending on how we look at it.
Could we have the ballot, if the council decides to move forward with that, could we do it in any election other than in November? We could do it in May.
Yeah.
Could have in May.
Remember, this year is already accounted for. It's starting in 2024. That's the year that we're looking at for the change. And could that be the vote? If you decide to go that you want to go to the voters, fine. It could be November, it could be May. May gives us even more time to work on the issue and get more feedback from you all. I think it's important for you guys. We continue to get the input from you. That feedback is really important, and that's why we had the meeting tonight. And that's why I think we should have continue meetings, whether they be special or they be continued to discuss at our council meetings. So, yeah, we're going to wrap this up in a minute. But go ahead, Paul.
Are we going to have May elections available to us now? Through Guadalupe, I thought this was going to be the last one because of Guadalupe County.
No, that's a whole other issue in terms of.
We're still working on it, and I apologize for those of you who were not here when we had this discussion. Guadalupe County now requires our property that we annexed in TJ on the other side of 1618. They are in Guadalupe County. Guadalupe County only has voting centers anywhere in November. And the only way we can have May elections as a city in Guadalupe County is if we physically have our own city building over there. So we're still working with the county to try to figure out a way for those residents, current and future, to be able to vote. One of the recommendations is that we move our city council elections to November. The council has not actually vetted most of that information at this point. And so we are continuing to work on that with the Bear County clerk, election clerk, and Guadalupe County election clerk. See if we can get them to some kind of compromise, which we've been working on. So we'll do all that all
Okay, thank you.
It's just another complication, I understand. I did want to make just one observation, and that Mary said we were going to have these at our next council meeting. We recognize that our next council meeting is just a week away. It's not a regular council meeting, but we do have one on the 18th. We will start looking at these things, but I can't guarantee that we're going to have.
No, we wouldn't expect you to come up with something by next week. I think the direction is to take a look at some language that could be used on a ballot.
Yeah, well, no, I'm saying, I've been writing down what everybody's been saying and in your direction, and I know there's not a consensus on which ones to do first, but, open space question, the interfund payment, looking to see if it's the full golf course loan, the golf course expenditures, the park budget, the 2002 park plan, and multiple choices, for ballot language. So, I'm just saying that even by May 2nd, I think is our first meeting, we may not have all of those items, but we'll get done as much as we can.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, everyone, for coming and seeing. I hope this was informative for you. We learn something every time we get together as well. Again, you need to understand that we don't interact with each other by law. We can't. So this is the only chance that we have to interface with each other and discuss these items. So thanks very much for coming, and we'll keep you attuned. You're welcome at every council meeting we have. If we're going to have another special meeting or two, we'll post that so you're all aware of it with plenty of time to make those decisions. And so, again, thank you very much for coming this evening. And right now it's 8:05, so we'll go ahead and conclude this meeting. Thank you. Thank you, council, for being here this evening.